All right. So, with all of us, myself, Luke, and John, we have some clients who we work with who are remote, right? That they're not in the same gyms as us. We send them a program, they do it on their own, they send us videos back. Maybe some of them send videos, others don't. Um, they send the results. Some send the results, some don't. And, we update their program based upon that. And we have some people who are in the same gym as us, right? That we see them actually doing their training. Sometimes, we just sort of see them from afar or see them over in the corner doing some power cleans and burpees. Or, yeah, it looks pretty good. Other times, it might be a little bit more organized where we're able to meet up in person and actually go through some stuff or specifically watch a training session. And I thought it would be interesting, John, in your case, to discuss Mary Kay's situation, right? Because you started working together in Chicago and then you moved to Denver, bought a gym there, were coaching her remotely for a while. And then this last summer, she moved out to Denver, right? So you kind of started in person, then went remote, and now we're in person again. So that's a pretty interesting trajectory. Especially working with a high level athlete like that, right? Where MK was able to qualify for the games last year and then ended up not being able to go based upon the changes to the season. But, for someone at that level, there's obviously going to be some things that you might notice in person that you don't pick up on remotely, et cetera. So I guess I'm just curious from your perspective, like what has that experience been like transitioning from in person to remote back to in person?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it allows you to do different things, right? So, um, as you kind of alluded to with remote people, the effectiveness will often come down to the communication levels. Are they inputting results? Are they sending you videos? And sometimes, as I'm sure you guys have, remote people who send you videos that you don't need to see at all. But oftentimes people don't send you videos when you need to see what's going on. And MK does have an Android, which means that when she tries to send me videos, it comes out as a, late 90s camcorder video. So it was always a little bit of a challenge for the remote stuff.
We are in no way affiliated with Apple, by the way, but
there are products other than Apple. They're just generally not as good. So for going back to that in person, it definitely allows for more. Is more the visual aspect, right? It's being able to see things in the moment rather than after the fact. It's being able to make corrections in real time as opposed to looking at a video that they've sent you and then saying, okay, well, next week I want you to do this, or in 3 days' time when you're doing this movement again, I want you to focus on this. It's sometimes you can catch it mid-set, make that correction, and make that improvement immediately. So from that aspect, the in-person allows you to really be more kind of up to date with your feedback, and essentially saving a little bit of time. It's less, with a more experienced athlete, there's less of a need to correct everything, right? A lot of the time it comes down to pacing or how reps are broken up, or they're on their 20th ring muscle up of a workout and they start getting a little sloppy on technique. And I think with a high level athlete, there is less mid-workout things or mid-lifting things that need changing. But those changes can make a bigger difference for the end products and end performance. So there's, it's always going to be easier in person. Whether it's a high level athlete or a lower level athlete, if you're able to see them in person all the time, it makes it easier as a coach. But you also then have to deal with how annoying they are as well. I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, that must be extremely challenging for you.
It's a highly stressful job. Yeah. I think like you were sort of just touching on sort of the differences between someone who is more of a beginner and then someone who is more experienced. I think based off of the people I've coached and had the opportunity to sort of see them training. I've worked, I think, just because of the setup of the gyms I've been working at in the past, I've worked with a lot of people who did supplementary stuff, but never really did like their own thing fully. So within that, they may be doing a class or something like that I'm coaching as well. So I would also probably be able to have a look at them a little bit in more depth there, but sort of just scanning open gym and seeing them do their own thing and that type of thing. What I usually found was like with people who are less experienced and potentially sort of just making a shift into competitive training, there's a lot about the intention behind training. And I think I remember when I was competing and I visited my old coach Andy in the UK, and I remember he just said, just train with me. And then for like a week, I just trained with him and we just did the same. I think we were both about to do the same competition. So we were pretty much just in like a bit of a taper peak type thing. So it didn't really matter what we were doing or what I was doing. So he sort of pulled me off my program and just said, you're going to train with me and do what I do and what my coach sends me. And I did that, and I learned so much from that week, just around training and trying to train with good intention, doing things properly, everything sort of from warming up. And at that stage I was fairly inexperienced, and I think that there's a lot to be sort of said for just honing people's behaviors around training and how they approach things first and foremost. And then like you were saying there, John, is like when you do have people who are more experienced, you don't want to be just giving them corrections all the time. You probably just want to let them like do their own thing because they're a lot more ingrained in how they move. Maybe they don't snatch the way that you want them to, but it might be detrimental for you to come in and be like, all right, we're going back to 55 pounds, 75 pounds, and we're just going to focus on your technique and we're just going to do this for half an hour. It's like they're not going to get productive training from that because they're not going to be able to have that change translated into the sort of heavier training and things like that, unless it's like something really quite far away from competition. So I think there's definitely a fine balance, and I will fully admit that sometimes I've sort of taken more experienced people and I've been like, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and I've sort of panicked as a coach, and I'm like, okay, we need to go back to this, but it's actually ended up not being the best use of time. It's not necessarily a waste of time, but it's not the best use of time. And I think that when you do have people who have been doing this for years and they're fairly autonomous, it's like just let them go into what they're doing, guide them in the in a certain way, and make sure that if they're not looking fast in their lifting session, maybe it's not going to be the best day for them to be building up to a heavy single. So it's like, okay, cool, you're good here, this is like a technically good weight, so let's just work at this, do several singles, try to get as much as you can from that, and be more about trying to manage the stimulus as opposed to trying to trying to manufacture everything within the session so that they are getting, or they have quite a lot of focus on like how they're approaching things, their technique and that type of thing. Like just let them operate. So I think that's an important thing. And I obviously in-person coaching is there's so much more you can get from it, but I do believe that like when you are in that sort of coach athlete relationship and you have someone who's more experienced there, that does turn more into like a collaboration, and you're there more as just like an objective like overseer essentially, and you are just observing things and pushing things in certain directions at certain times, and you're not necessarily trying to like micromanage everything, but maybe a little bit more of a micromanagement style is required with the beginner because they just need to develop set habits that are going to allow them to have good long-term training success. So and sometimes, well, obviously you've got to assess the person as well. Some people deal well with direction, some people don't. Some people expect it, some people don't. And I think that one of the biggest things in remote coaching and just coaching in general is, especially in an individual sport like this, is like as much as people need individual coaching design around what they're doing, the weaknesses they're working on, the structural balance issues they might have, the this, that, and the other, they sort of need that as well from the coaching itself. So how you communicate with them. If you, as soon as you sort of try to like box people into a certain way, sometimes that doesn't really work well. And that's when like coach athlete relationships don't necessarily continue.
So I think that what we've sort of established here, right, is that there's a pretty significant difference between the way that we would want to coach a beginner and the way we would want to coach an advanced athlete, especially remotely. When we're trying to figure out how to get someone their first muscle up, there's obviously challenges to doing that remotely where you're like, no, you're doing the thing with your wrist. Like, don't you know what I mean? When you do it wrong, you got to do it right. That's difficult to communicate properly via video back and forth, etc. But I think for the purposes of this discussion, I'm more interested in the subtle stuff that we potentially see in more advanced athletes when we see them actually training in person. Right? Like what are the things that you guys are looking for if you're watching someone who's pretty good, right? Say do a conditioning workout or lift heavy or something like that. Because I think that most coaches have some sort of intuitive sense of when something is going well, when it's going badly, when someone is executing properly, when someone's tired, when someone's sort of like going to the well to actually finish a workout. There's a lot of those little tiny things that in person you can pick up on, but you don't necessarily get that from a result number and a few sentences of like, this felt pretty good today, was able to go unbroken on chest to bar, right? You might have an idea of it, but it's not necessarily going to be super obvious based upon that. So what are you guys looking for in person on those more subtle points?
I mean, for me, I find a lot of it is things which are maybe not necessarily technique, but pacing or efficiency things. So it might be that I look at someone's burpee technique and they have a little bit of a hitch at the hip as they come off the ground, and it just slows them down a little bit per rep. And it's like, I look at that and be like, okay, maybe we could work on burpee cycling and just try and increase the pace that they go at. Or maybe it's how they transition onto the rower or something like that. It's small things that you can watch them in a workout and pick up on. That's not like, oh, this is something major we need to work on, but it's something like, oh, we could throw in some work on this and it's going to make them more efficient on a workout, and it's going to give them that extra little bit of assistance come competition time, whether that's, online for the open or in person. And I think it's really those small things that I pick up on the higher level athletes, and that stuff in person. So again, going back to MK, we've worked on a few things that we wouldn't normally have worked on because I've seen it in person of her doing something. Her, I want to say ring muscle ups. She was a little short on her kip essentially. And we were finding that once she was fatigued, that fifth or sixth rep of a set was starting to be kind of hit and miss. And then we got her opening up her kip a bit more into a slightly bigger kip, and she wasn't having that same issue. And she'd been not necessarily shorting her kip, but she was just trying to be efficient and not go into too much of a kip for it. But the reality was she needed a little bit more. And it's those kind of things that you really can pick up on when you're watching someone work out. And I'm sure you guys see it if you're watching the games even. You'll see games athletes doing a workout and you'll be like, well, they're really screwing that up. They could be doing this a lot better. And for me as a coach, I'm watching those guys and thinking, who's their coach? The reality is that, they're always going to be doing things a little bit differently when you're in a kind of pressure situation in the games. But I think there's always efficiency things that high level athletes can change to improve.
Well, yeah. And anyone who's ever tried to fix someone's movement knows that people just don't listen too.
Yeah, especially when you're one of the best athletes in the world. It's like, It's hard to convince them that they need to change something.
Yeah,
right. I mean, we could use MK as an example where, when she was in Chicago, be like, MK, I don't think there should be a good morning in your wall balls. Like at no point in your wall ball should you be doing a good morning. She's like, haha, yeah, right. Didn't fix it.
Yeah, that's mostly fixed now.
I think there's you want to. So one of the things I would say that people have when they are training in like a competitive group, say you have a group of people who sort of throw down several times a week or something like that, you almost can, pass these like tricks and tips on to other people. And there's like, it's a bit of just like oh, you see someone doing it and you're like, okay, I'm going to copy that. Or, they share it with you after the workout. I think that in the remote coach setting, obviously, generally people are doing their own thing. So it's a little bit, they don't necessarily have that. So sometimes it's about trying to give someone that and be like, why don't you try doing this? Why don't you try doing that? Making suggestions and just showing them like another way of going about it in terms of creating some efficiency, whether it's how they approach a certain movement. I do think intention is probably like a big one as well. Like in the middle of a workout is sort of, I've sort of seen sometimes, someone is on a rowing machine and they all of a sudden turn like quite a big chunk of work into some like work rest ratio type interval thing. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Like that's not the most efficient way to go about it. Cause you just, you're going to dig yourself into a bit of a hole here. So in those cases, obviously you're like trying to change someone's approach and you're trying to provide a bit of context. It's like, you need to go, or you need to hold back, and you got to try to sort of figure out those things. And then I think the other thing as well is, if you watch the best in the world compete, especially the good movers, you just notice that like how efficient they are. They have all the tricks, they have all the little things. Back when you're allowed to, there were like the people who would like go overhead with a barbell and then walk forward to go over the finish line. Whereas I know that's not allowed now, but like, it was like those little things, they would have those, but then as well as that, they would move impeccably. And, they may, they stay stiff through the core on a burpee. They're not like snaking it too much and they're not wasting energy. And it's picking up on those things as well. It's picking up on like, okay, we 21-2 was just announced yesterday. So it's like, okay, when the burpee box jump over, it's sort of like you probably want to like move and shuffle to the box in this way so that you can jump and you can approach it at the best angle. And, but it's giving people like those little bits of like technical advice as well as those sort of more efficiency, strategy based stuff. So I think it's like, you want to give them tips and tricks, you want to give them that intention, you want to tell them like to push, and you want to give them, some people don't necessarily like it, but I do think that in my experience, people do enjoy being told like, okay, I want you to go now. And as well as that, just making sure that their movement is as squared up as it needs to be for that individual. Everyone has their own little expression of movement. You obviously have people who look a lot more textbook than others, but you want to also just make sure that they sort of have their own little way of going through it as efficiently as possible.
Luke, I think that some of the stuff that you were touching on earlier is really important for in-person coaching, which is recognizing when someone needs to be pushed more or when someone needs to be pulled back, etc. Right? Because I think that for myself, thinking about things that I've been able to notice for people in person that are tougher to pick up in a remote setting have a lot to do with let's just say misconceptions from the athlete about what they should be doing or what's important in a given scenario, right? So it's something like, someone attempting a heavy lift, and as a coach, you see it and you're like, yo, you're done for today. Like, just stop now. And you can see that they want to keep going, right? And you've just seen the mechanics alter too much and it just looks sketchy, and you're like, you're just not going to get it. And even if you do, like, it's not worth the risk. Or on the other end, right, someone missing a lift and getting super, super frustrated, and you're like, yo, that's there. Like, just do it again. Right? You don't need you don't need to fix anything. You don't need to be like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
What's my error? Like, what do I need to fix? Like, just fucking do it again.
Give me the cue. Give me the
right. Yeah. Right. Like a lot of stuff like that. Like, oh, like what drills do I need to do for my ring muscle ups? Like, you just need to do more of them. Like, and that's the stuff that you see in person, is just the mistakes that people are making, which is they tend to be beating their head against the wall on something that they need to just stop doing, right? They tend to be looking for some magical cue or some magical exercise when they just need more experience. They tend to, have like a die at all costs to hit certain paces in a workout where the intention is like consistent good movement under, heavy breathing. And you're like, okay, this isn't helpful at this point,
Yeah.
because you're compensating and you're dying. And even if your splits are consistent, like that really wasn't what you were supposed to be doing today. And other times, the point is for them to go too fast on the bike to start something and then see if they can hold on through burpees and dumbbell snatches or whatever. And like they coasted through the bike and just like moved through super smooth. And you're like, I wanted this to suck. And you made that 80% effort.
Yeah.
So I think that in person, you just see these mistakes that people make, and there's so many of them. There's just so many mistakes. And it's not just, John, the subtle movement errors that you were talking about, like, oh, like here's how you strap your feet into the erg. It's, you just completely miss the point of the session. And I do think that some of that stuff, it's not like every session needs to be executed perfectly, because it's really the accumulation over time of good training. But by getting people a better framework for what they should be focusing on in a specific session, you can help them build that intuition for what they should or shouldn't be doing in a training session, in a competitive environment, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely find myself changing more things for people who I see in person as compared to remote. It'll be watching them do a lift, and they're just too heavy to drill the technique or the thing that we're going for. And it's like, okay, take 20 pounds off and let's start that again.
Yeah.
Things like that are pretty.
Like I've had people visit me, and then sometimes I can just sort of remember distinctly, like when I've been programming the period that they've been visiting me, I've just sort of put in their training like snatch session, and then put Metcon, and then put something, and left it really broad and open. And I've just wanted those people to come to that session, and I've always maybe done like a one-to-one type thing, and sort of trained with them maybe potentially. But in those instances, and these are with people who are at higher level, it's like just kept it open and just said like, okay, well, we're just going to see what's on for today, and let's just see what we can get out of this. I know,
just go with the flow, man.
Yeah, like I know you need to work on this, and this. So we're going to try to go for that. And hey, if try to give a general outline of it. But I think that's sort of that's a different scenario. That's not day to day. That's something that is very much like, okay, we've got 3 days. Let's get to work. Let's try to get as much as we can, and let's try to make sure that we're building as good a platform as we can for your training coming up. But I think that it's really important that there is an element of that within, or that there's just an openness to having changes happen if you have like a coach who's there on site, because the coach is going to write something. I think that you have this is sort of going off topic, not away from this point, but you have different ways of contextualizing the session of like what we're looking for, right? At OPEX they have that, what they call the sort of pain, gain, sustain type thing, and it's a very easy way of like registering, okay, this is what I need to do, this is what this needs to feel like, this is what this is trying to get, if that makes sense. So it's a way, and it's a tool of contextualizing things. And obviously within different remote coaching or different remote coaches obviously can have their own different systems and things like that. I think I remember the guys at Red Pill talking about something. They would talk about something being threshold, and then something being competition, and then something being practice, something along those lines. Don't quote me on that, but that idea of like trying to sort of create that context in coaching is super important. And you can just do that through written notes, you can do that through naming it, you can do that through RPE, whatever it is. But it's really important that the athlete has an understanding of, okay, this is what we're trying to get from this. And sometimes this is where like when you coach coaches, sometimes it's a little bit easier because they've been maybe exposed to the idea of mechanics, consistency, intensity, or something like that. So they sort of have an idea and an understanding of like, okay, I'm not going to let it get to this point where I don't need it to. And then you have some individuals like you were talking about who if you watch someone go for a heavy attempt and they miss it, I generally know that like whether they have it on that day or not, or whether they have that lift or not. Whereas I know that like if, say for instance, I wasn't there to say, hey, stop it, let's pull it down 10 kilos and let's just start working some sort of more technique. They may they may go off and do one of these like 19 attempts at PR type, and they create like some crazy YouTube video out of it, which I'm sure I've watched John North put up like something of like 20 attempts at like 160 snatch or some shit, and it's like, yeah, like that's
well, and then he finally gets it at the end, which is like that's not what people need to see.
Yeah.
Don't tell them to do that.
Yeah. that's great. That's an inspiring story. But especially CrossFitters do not need to see that, because otherwise, that type of mentality taken into weightlifting, taken into their gymnastics, taken into their cross is like, okay, well, if that's the case, then let's just do that 8-minute AMRAP until you get that score that you want. Just rest another 8 minutes and then go again.
You guys sound like quitters.
I mean, I'm very low testosterone, very low social status, very low motivation. I'm ready to quit.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, ready to quit. But something I am curious about is I see a lot of athletes who I coach make the same type of mistake consistently, right? The people who push too hard tend to push too hard. People who kind of give up too easy, give up too easy. People who get like overly rigid and focused on a specific detail, stay overly rigid and focused on a specific detail, right? And I've had a hard time getting people to make progress on their tendencies that they struggle with. And I'm curious if either of you guys have had success with improving someone's understanding of like what they should be doing in training, especially in a remote setting, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I've there's definitely, it's taken a little bit of work in terms of just setting certain parameters in training, being a lot more descriptive about what is required. Like I've had, I think I remember one athlete just saying, "Oh, I just did this and I just went all out because I wanted to kill myself," and I'm like, okay, like you're not just, have you just finished a stressful day at work and go into your 5 o'clock class just to blow off some steam, or are you trying to, compete in a sport and, you sort of devote 2 hours of your prime time to training? So, there's something there. Like sometimes people come with a bit of like a different idea and perspective, and they may get into this sport and they may have got into this because it was like some stress relief thing that they did, and they were doing like boot camps, and then that progressed into like CrossFit, and now they're doing a sport, and sometimes that psychology comes back into their training. But yeah, in those cases, it's been like, okay, row, do not let the pace get over this. Keep your stroke rate at this. Go through this movement. Nothing more than X amount unbroken. Being sort of quite descriptive about that, but also having like a conversation about it as well, and being like, yeah, this is the reason. But it's quite hard. You have to really connect with their not to sound all self-helpy, but their like sort of why behind what they do. And you have to figure out what the motivations are, and then you sort of have to do some sort of greasy salesman style chat where you're like, well, I'm gonna trick you into but like it's just like usually well, this is something you want to do, you've got to try to push, and I've also had conversations with people where it's like, so they may have they may not actually want to do that thing, maybe, and in those scenarios it's taken a little bit of like, okay, well, I might have to change how we go about this, but let's make sure that we get what you are trying to get. And I think that it's really important that like when people do start off in like a coach athlete, the athlete's got to make sure that they get what they came for as well. And it's like if they want to have some fun, or that's probably one of the things I've had push back on the most, is like if they want to have some fun per se included in their training or something like that, it's like we need to figure out how we can do that in the most productive way whilst also achieving your goals and working towards that.
Totally. Yes. I mean, I think that as far as summarizing some of the stuff we've talked about, there's clear benefits to working in person, and a lot of them have to do with subtle noticings on the part of coaching, right? I mean, John mentioned some like detail oriented aspects of pacing, of transitions, etc., that you can really only pick up watching someone. And you can get some of that stuff in video, but if you watch someone, load their plates on an escalating barbell workout, you're like, oh, okay, hold on, like we can do that a lot better. And then there's more bigger picture subtleties as far as just like execution of workouts, the types of errors that people tend to make, which, do tend to be consistent for a person across time, as I've seen, right? That certain personality types tend to make the same kinds of errors. So it's not that remote coaching can't work. It obviously does work, right? I mean, we've all had successful remote coaching relationships, many with athletes competing at a very high level. Plenty of the athletes who are elite in the sport do have remote coaches, and they end up podium in a podium position year after year. So it's not like it's not possible, but there are challenges associated with it, particularly on the more subtle level. So anyone who's coaching or who is an athlete who has a coach or a program that they're following, we just need to be aware of these potential challenges and just try the best we can to maximize our subtleties and do workouts right. Just do it right for once. Come on.
That would make it a lot easier for sure.